The searing sun beats down on him, sweat-soaked and straining, as a guttural tear echoes through the suburban quiet. A jagged shard of blue vinyl, a trophy of his labor, falls to the churned earth. From a window across the way, a shadow shifts, a face contorted in a silent, furious rage. A faint, vindictive smirk. The pool is gone. He stands victorious, only for the world to turn a dizzying canvas of flashing red and blue. The siren wails, shattering the peace he fought for. The shovel bit into the sun-baked earth with a satisfying crunch, a sound Alex hadn't heard in years. For the last 5 summers, the back half of his yard had been dominated by a sprawling, above-ground pool, a shimmering blue testament to a fleeting impulse. It was meant to be the centerpiece of his suburban life, a place of laughter and cool escape. In reality, it was a constant, draining chore. The chemical testing, the leaf skimming, the endless cycle of repairs. It was a money pit and a time sink, a monument to a dream that had long since deflated. Today, that monument was coming down. Alex leaned on the handle, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. His 5-year-old son, Leo, was due to start kindergarten in the fall, and the yard, once cleared, would become a small patch of grass for him to run on. A small, simple patch of grass. The thought filled Alex with a quiet, profound contentment. He'd spent the morning draining the last of the chlorinated water, a slow, trickling exodus that snaked across his lawn and into the street drain. Now, the heavy, waterlogged liner was deflated, a wrinkled blue skin ready to be peeled away. He grabbed his utility knife, its blade glinting under the midday sun. That's when he heard it. The distinctive click of a window latch, followed by a soft, judgmental cough. Alex didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Linda, his next-door neighbor, a woman who seemed to exist solely to monitor the perceived transgressions of her community. He and his wife, Sarah, had learned to live with her endless, passive-aggressive critiques. Their lawn was a half-inch too long last week. Their recycling bin wasn't out precisely at 6 a.m. The pool, in its shimmering, chlorine-scented glory, had been a constant source of friction. "Looks like you finally decided to do something about that eyesore," Linda's voice chirped from her manicured porch. Alex didn't respond. He focused on cutting a line in the thick vinyl. "I must say I am relieved. It really brings down the aesthetic of the entire block. You know, we have certain standards here." Alex suppressed a sigh. "Just clearing the way for some grass, Linda?" "Well, just so you know, the runoff is all over the street," she said, her voice dripping with the fake concern of someone delighted to have found a reason to complain. "It's creating quite a puddle. I hope you're being mindful of the storm drain. We don't want to cause any issues with the city, do we?" Alex turned, his expression carefully neutral. "It's just a bit of water, Linda. It'll evaporate in a few hours." "A bit of water?" She scoffed, her perfectly coiffed hair unmoving in the still air. "It's a river! The runoff from a large volume of water like that could do untold damage to the ecosystem. I've seen it on the news." She pointed a bony, accusatory finger at the small stream still flowing from the half-removed liner. The conversation was a familiar dance, and Alex had no patience for it today. He simply nodded and went back to work. He focused on the satisfying tear of the liner, the sound a low, ripping thunder in the oppressive silence. He was a man with a plan, a physical task, and a singular goal, to rid himself of a burden. Linda's disapproval was a minor irritation, like a fly buzzing around his head. He ignored it. An hour passed. The sun climbed higher, relentless. Alex had managed to pull a large section of the liner free, revealing the patchy, dead grass beneath. He felt a surge of accomplishment. He was halfway there. He was so focused that he didn't notice Linda, now standing at the edge of his property, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She was watching him, a small, knowing smile on her lips. She had her phone in her hand. "My husband Frank says you should be more careful with that runoff. It could be a violation of city codes," she said, her voice a little too loud. "He's a stickler for the rules, you know." Alex straightened up, his back protesting. "Linda, I appreciate the concern, but it's a non-issue. I'm almost done." "Oh, you're not almost done," she said, her smile widening. It wasn't a friendly smile. "You've just started. All that liner has to be disposed of properly. You can't just throw it in the trash." It's considered hazardous material. And all that debris? The city has strict regulations about debris. We all have to follow them, you know. It's what keeps this neighborhood so perfect. She took a step back, her eyes sweeping over his yard, a look of utter disgust on her face. "You've made a mess, Alex." Something in her tone, the sheer, unadulterated pleasure she took in his discomfort, finally broke his patience. "Look, Linda, I'm doing this on my own property. I'm not hurting anyone, and I'm taking care of it. Please just leave me alone." Her smile vanished. Her face hardened, a mask of pure indignation. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, Alex. I'm simply trying to make sure you follow the rules. It's my right as a concerned neighbor." He threw the now separated vinyl sheet to the ground with a soft thud. "It's a pool liner. It's not a crime." "You might be surprised," she said, a new cold glint in her eye. She looked down at her phone, her thumb scrolling. Some people don't appreciate being told what to do, even when it's for their own good. She took one last look at his yard, at the scattered debris and the torn-up earth. Some people need to learn a lesson. Alex watched her retreat, the slam of her screen door echoing through the sudden silence. He felt a mix of frustration and exhaustion. He was so close. Just a few more hours, and this whole nightmare would be behind him. He looked down at the pile of blue vinyl, then at the half-torn-up patch of lawn. The task suddenly seemed monumental, the sun beating down with renewed intensity. He went back to work, trying to push Linda and her empty threats from his mind. He worked with a renewed, almost desperate energy, pulling and cutting and dragging the heavy material. He finished the job, the last piece of the pool now a crumpled pile. He stood over it, panting, a thin layer of grime covering his arms and face. The yard was a disaster, a churned-up mess of dirt and dead grass, but it was his mess. It was the mess of progress. He wiped his hands on his jeans, a weary sense of victory washing over him. The pool was gone. Then, a low, pulsing thrum cut through the air. At first, Alex thought it was a truck passing on the main road. But the sound grew louder, closer, the distinct rhythmic beat of a siren coming from the end of his street. It wasn't just the siren, but a faint, pulsing glow of red and blue light, reflecting off the windows of his neighbors' houses. The light grew brighter, the sound more piercing, until the police cruiser pulled to a stop directly in front of his driveway. The lights bathed his house, his yard, and his triumphant mess in a strobing, unsettling light. The driver's side door opened. A tall, serious-looking officer stepped out. He looked at Alex, then at the dismantled pool liner, and finally, his gaze settled on Linda's house, where she was now standing at her window, watching, her small, satisfied smile a clear, "Cold victory, Alex?" the officer said, his voice flat. "We have a report of an environmental—" The officer's question hung in the humid air, a stark, flat statement that felt heavier than the pile of vinyl at Alex's feet. The flashing red and blue lights painted the scene in a surreal, pulsating rhythm. Alex's tired mind struggled to process the words. Environmental hazard and illegal dumping. He looked from the officer, a tall, impassive figure whose gaze seemed to cut right through him, to Linda's window, where the gleam of her satisfied smile was now a beacon of pure malice. "What? No, officer, this is a misunderstanding," Alex stammered, his weary voice sounding thin and weak. "I'm just taking down an old pool. The water's all gone. The liner is right here. It's a mess, I know, but it's my mess, and I'm going to clean it up." The officer's hand went to his belt, but he didn't draw anything. He simply pulled out a small notepad and a pen. The report states that a large quantity of chlorinated water was drained into the public storm drain, and that a substantial amount of non-biodegradable waste has been left on the property line, potentially in violation of city ordinances regarding debris and waste management. He jotted something down on his pad, his movements slow and deliberate, each stroke of the pen a new layer of dread for Alex. Is that an accurate description of the situation? Alex felt his blood pressure rise. The water was a river? The liner was non-biodegradable waste? Linda's words, a moment ago so petty and theatrical, now felt like a legal indictment. It was maybe 50 gallons at most. The pool was mostly empty, and the liner is just a piece of plastic. I was going to take it to the dump this weekend. The officer, whose name tag read Miller, didn't respond. He simply walked past Alex, his gaze sweeping over the lawn. He stopped at the edge of the asphalt where a dark, wet stain still marked the path of the runoff. He bent down, touched the asphalt, and then straightened, looking at the dead patch of grass beneath the pile of liner. He walked back to his cruiser and pulled a small digital camera from the glove box. He pointed the lens at the dark stain, the crumpled liner, and the small patches of torn-up earth. Each click of the camera's shutter felt like a nail being hammered into Alex's coffin of frustration. From inside, a new voice cut through the tension. "Alex, what's going on?" Alex's heart sank. It was Sarah, his wife. She was just getting home from work, her tote bag slung over her shoulder, her face a mask of weary confusion. Her eyes went from the police car to the pile of blue vinyl, and then to his face. She dropped her bag on the grass and hurried over. "What's this about, officer?" she asked, her voice sharp with protective concern. She instinctively stepped between Alex and the officer, a small, fiercely defensive shield. Officer Miller turned to her, his expression unchanging. "We received a complaint, ma'am. A citizen complaint regarding potential violations of city code." "A citizen complaint?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, and she slowly turned her head to look at Linda's window. She saw the shape of a woman standing there, a hand held up as if to block the sun, though Sarah knew it was a lie. The woman was watching them, relishing the scene. Sarah's face hardened, her jaw clenching. She looked back at the officer. "Officer, my husband is just taking down our pool. He's doing a good thing for our son. This is a ridiculous waste of your time." "Ma'am, I'm just here to follow up on a report," Officer Miller said, his voice now a touch firmer. "The report is specific. Hazardous runoff and illegal disposal of waste. These are not minor concerns. The city has a zero-tolerance policy for environmental violations." He held up his hand, a small, official-looking document in his palm. "According to Municipal Code Section 4B-17, the disposal of non-biodegradable materials such as pool liners, plastics, and other debris without proper permitting and collection is subject to a fine of up to $500 per day until the violation is remedied. The runoff is also a separate issue, Section 4A-21. Any discharge into a public drain that is not consistent with natural precipitation is subject to a separate citation. The complainant has provided photo and video evidence." Sarah's head snapped towards Linda's house, her face a mask of shock and fury. "She filmed us?" Alex felt a cold wave wash over him. This wasn't just a complaint. It was a planned ambush. Linda hadn't just called the cops. She had built a case. He looked at the officer, his mind racing. "Officer, please. This is a misunderstanding. My neighbor has a vendetta against us. She's been harassing us for years about this pool. This is her way of getting back at me for taking it down." Officer Miller sighed, a hint of weariness finally showing in his eyes. "Sir, I understand you may have a history with your neighbor. That's a civil matter. My concern is the code violations. The evidence is here." He pointed to the digital camera he was holding. "I'll file a report with the city's Public Works Department. They'll likely be in touch with you to schedule an inspection. In the meantime, I highly recommend you find a way to dispose of this liner properly and to ensure no more water or debris enters the public street." He handed Alex the official-looking slip of paper. It was a warning notice, not a citation, but the words printed on it were as cold and sharp as a knife. "Violation notice. Case Turner, 23-4567. Offense, environmental hazard, illegal dumping. Corrective action required." "This is insane," Sarah whispered, her face pale. She took the slip from Alex's hand, her fingers trembling. "She's trying to bankrupt us for taking down our own pool." Officer Miller tipped his cap. "Have a good evening, folks. Try to resolve this quickly." He turned and walked back to his cruiser. As he got in, Alex saw him glance at Linda's window. Linda, in return, gave him a small, respectful nod, a gesture of thanks for a job well done. The cruiser pulled away, the flashing lights casting a final, mocking goodbye. The street was silent again, but the peace was gone. Alex and Sarah were left standing in the middle of their driveway, the crumpled pile of vinyl a grim centerpiece, and the warning notice a chilling weight in Sarah's hand. Sarah's eyes were wide with a mix of disbelief and anger. "She actually did it," she said, her voice a low growl. "She actually called the cops on us for this." Alex looked from the notice to Linda's house. The window was now dark. She had retreated, her mission accomplished. He wasn't just tired anymore. He was filled with a cold, simmering rage. This wasn't about a pool or a city ordinance. It was about a woman who saw his simple act of a family-driven improvement as a personal affront. It was about control. He had just wanted to create a small patch of green grass for his son. Linda had turned it into a battleground. He crumpled the notice in his hand, a sudden fierce resolve hardening in his heart. The past 5 years had been a series of small retreats, small concessions to his neighbor's petty tyrannies. Not anymore. This was a line she had crossed. A cold, hard certainty settled over him. He wasn't just going to clean up his mess. He was going to fight back. He was going to finish what he started, and this time, Linda would know exactly who she was dealing with. He wasn't going to just take down his pool. He was going to expose the true nature of the mess in his neighborhood, and it wouldn't be pretty. The warning notice felt like a flimsy piece of cardboard in Alex's clenched fist, yet it was heavier than the entire pool liner combined. The phantom glow of police lights still pulsed behind his eyes, a mocking reminder of the public humiliation. Sarah stood beside him, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion, but her eyes held a spark he hadn't seen in a long time. It was a cold, quiet fire. "We're not letting her get away with this," Sarah said, her voice low and steady. It wasn't a question. Alex slowly unclenched his hand, the crinkled paper now a map of his rage. "No, we're not." He looked at the mangled heap of vinyl, a monument to a simple, honest effort. Linda had turned something benign into a weapon. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He had spent his afternoon trying to make his yard a better place, and she had responded by trying to destroy their lives. "First, we deal with this," Alex said, gesturing to the liner. "Then we deal with her." Sarah nodded, a grim resolve on her face. "What's the proper way to dispose of a pool liner?" "I'll look it up." She pulled out her phone. While she searched, Alex began rolling up the massive sheet of plastic, his movements no longer weary but fueled by a focused, white-hot anger. The vinyl, once so cumbersome, now felt like a battle standard being furled. This wasn't a chore anymore. It was the first step of a campaign. A few minutes later, Sarah looked up from her phone, a look of incredulous frustration on her face. "It's a whole process. You have to call a special waste management company. You can't put it in a dumpster. It has to be cut into specific size sections and bundled, and there's a fee, of course. For a pool this size, it could be hundreds of dollars. A fine of up to $500 a day," Alex added, quoting the officer's words. He had been so focused on his work, he hadn't considered the bureaucracy that surrounded it. He should have known. Linda's world was a web of rules and regulations, and she was an expert at using them to trap people who lived outside her rigid parameters. "We'll call them tomorrow," Alex said. He wasn't going to give her a chance to complain again. He would do it by the book, down to the last ridiculous detail. "But tonight we look up those municipal codes. All of them." That night, the dining room table became a war room. Laptops hummed, a mountain of paper grew, and the air was thick with the scent of coffee and righteous fury. Sarah focused on the city's website, navigating the labyrinthine municipal code, while Alex did a deep dive into online forums, searching for a pattern. He found threads from other homeowners, sharing stories of their own Karen neighbors, of petty disputes that escalated into legal battles. The stories were a chilling echo of his own. The most common advice was to document everything, to install cameras, and to know the rules better than the person trying to enforce them. "Got it," Sarah said, her voice sharp with discovery. She had found Section 4B17, word for word. She scrolled further. "And 4A21 about runoff." She looked at him, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization. "You know, she didn't just call the police. She called the Public Works Department, too. That's what the officer meant by them getting in touch. They'll be here soon for a formal inspection." Alex felt a tremor of fear. This wasn't just a warning. It was a process. The wheels of bureaucracy were turning, and they were grinding towards him. This was a whole new level of escalation. Linda hadn't just tried to humiliate them. She had tried to put them in a permanent state of expensive bureaucratic purgatory. He felt a surge of cold hatred for her. He pushed his chair back. Okay, we'll do everything right. We'll call the waste company first thing in the morning. We'll get a receipt. We'll take pictures of the clean yard. We'll be beyond reproach. But that's not enough. She wants a fight? She's got one. The next day, Alex woke up early. He and Sarah went out to the yard, working together to cut the liner into neat, manageable sections, using the detailed instructions Sarah had found online. They bundled the plastic with twine, making perfect regulation-sized packages. He placed them neatly on the curb, a defiant statement of compliance. Sarah took a dozen photos from every conceivable angle, the timestamp a silent witness. When the special waste collection truck arrived that afternoon, Alex made a point to ask the driver to sign a receipt, documenting the pickup. The driver, a large man with a weary expression, looked at Alex as if he were a complete lunatic. Just taking the trash, buddy. Don't worry about it. But Alex worried about it. He knew Linda was watching. He felt her eyes on his back as he talked to the driver, as he signed the slip, as the truck rumbled away with the last remnants of his summer nightmare. He looked up at her window. A brief flash of movement, a curtain falling. She had seen it all. With the first violation addressed, Alex turned his attention to the second part of his plan. He had spent the last 24 hours thinking about Linda's own yard, about the things he had seen but never paid attention to. The meticulously maintained flower beds, the gleaming SUV, the unnaturally perfect lawn. He and Sarah decided to do their own inspection. They weren't looking for a broken branch or a weed. They were looking for something she had complained about, something that showed her as the hypocrite she was. They started with the runoff. Alex remembered Linda's passionate lecture about chlorinated water. He and Sarah walked down the sidewalk past her house, their eyes scanning the pristine curb. Nothing. They walked past the house on the other side. Nothing. Alex felt a knot of frustration tightening in his gut. She was too careful. She was too perfect. Then Sarah's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. Look. She pointed to a small, nearly invisible trickle of water coming from a pipe that ran out from the back of Linda's house, near the air conditioning unit. It was a constant, almost imperceptible drip that flowed into a small channel she had built to carry it to the curb. It was water running into the public street. And it wasn't natural precipitation. Alex felt a surge of triumph. "What's that from?" he whispered. "Condensation," Sarah said, a small, vindictive smile on her face. "From her central air. It's a constant, steady stream of water. It's not just a few gallons. It's an ongoing process, day and night all summer. And it's going right into the storm drain," Alex added, the words a silent victory cry. They weren't sure if it was a violation, but it was a perfect mirror of her complaint. He pulled out his phone and took a series of photos, then switched to video, capturing the steady stream of water flowing from her property. He wasn't just taking photos. He was building a case, just as she had done. He was speaking her language. They continued their walk, emboldened. They looked for debris, for things that might violate the city's meticulous codes. They found nothing at first. Her yard was a sterile, barren landscape of perfect green grass and impeccably pruned hedges. But as they rounded the corner and looked at her side yard, behind the fence, they saw it. A glint of metal behind a row of shrubs. Alex squinted, his heart hammering in his chest. It was an old rusted metal shed leaning precariously against the fence. It was an eyesore, the kind of thing that would have been a constant source of complaint from Linda if it had been in anyone else's yard. But it wasn't just an eyesore. It was a clear violation of the city's junk and debris ordinance, a rusting heap of a building in a place where it clearly didn't belong. Sarah pointed at it, her voice a hushed, disbelieving whisper. That's not a shed. That's a shed on wheels. A mobile shed. It's an unregistered vehicle. A trailer. And it's right there, rusting away. How did we never notice that? Alex had no idea. It was a massive piece of junk, half hidden by overgrown shrubs. He took a photo, then a video, and then a close-up of the rusted, decaying metal. Linda, the queen of the perfectly manicured, clean-cut neighborhood, had a junk heap rotting on her own property. It wasn't just illegal. It was poetic. "She's so worried about our pool liner, a temporary piece of debris," Sarah said, her voice filled with triumphant irony. "But she has a permanent eyesore on her property. A rusting, non-biodegradable, hazardous piece of metal that's probably leaching chemicals into the ground." Alex felt a cold, hard smile spread across his face. He looked down at the camera, at the digital evidence he had collected. The photos of the leaking condensation, the video of the rusted shed, the proof of her hypocrisy. It was a perfectly built case. He looked up at Linda's window. It was dark now, the night having swallowed the sunlight. But Alex knew she was in there, waiting for the Public Works Department to call, waiting for her victory lap. She had tried to drown them in bureaucratic mud. She had tried to bury them, but now he had a shovel. And this time, he was going to use it on her perfectly. The morning after their discovery, Alex and Sarah were a united front, fueled by a new, focused purpose. They sat at the dining room table again, but this time, the atmosphere was one of quiet, methodical resolve, not frantic defense. Sarah had the city's website open on her laptop, navigating the murky waters of the municipal code with the grim efficiency of a seasoned lawyer. Alex, meanwhile, was meticulously organizing the photos and videos from his phone, creating a digital folder titled "The Case of the Rusted Shed." "Okay, I'm on the city's complaint form," Sarah announced, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "The process is exactly the same as the one she used against us. Environmental hazard, junk and debris, potential zoning violations." She looked at Alex, her eyes glinting with a vengeful humor. "I can file it anonymously, but I don't think we should. She needs to know who's doing this. This isn't about hiding. This is about accountability." Alex nodded. "Agreed, let's do it. By the book. Just like she taught us." They filled out the form, citing the specific code sections they had found. They uploaded the videos of the condensation drip and the photos of the rusted shed, each file a tiny digital missile aimed directly at Linda's perfect facade. They provided their names and address, a statement of defiance in the face of her calculated malice. When Sarah clicked Submit, a small confirmation message popped up on the screen, a silent final seal on their decision. The war had officially begun. The next 2 days were an exercise in tense anticipation. They found themselves watching Linda's house, a habit they had previously been so desperate to avoid. They saw her in her yard, tending to her pristine flower beds, her demeanor as prim and self-satisfied as ever. She clearly had no idea what was coming. She was still living in the world where she was the victor, the righteous one who had put a stop to her neighbor's minor transgression. The thought of the impending shock on her face was a small, satisfying victory in itself. On the third morning, a small, unremarkable sedan pulled up in front of Linda's house. It wasn't a police car, but a city vehicle, a discreet logo on the side door marking it as Public Works. Alex and Sarah watched from their window as a man in a polo shirt and khakis got out. He had a clipboard and a camera. He looked a lot like the officer who had come to their house, but with a different kind of authority, the quiet, bureaucratic kind. The inspector walked right past Linda's house and down the sidewalk. Alex's heart sank. Had they sent him to the wrong address? Was their complaint being ignored? Then he saw the inspector stop directly in front of Linda's driveway. He looked down at the curb, and his gaze followed the faint, wet trail from the condensation pipe all the way back to her house. He bent down, took a few photos of the trickling water, and then walked to the side of her house. Suddenly, Linda's front door opened. She had a watering can in her hand, dressed in a perfectly pressed blouse, ready to water her flowers. She saw the city car, then the inspector. She beamed, a friendly neighborhood smile plastered on her face. She assumed he was there to follow up on her complaint about them. "Good morning," she chirped a little too loud. "Are you here about the Alex family? I hope they've gotten their act together. The neighborhood has really been in a state since they started that project." The inspector turned, a polite but distant expression on his face. "Ma'am? No, I'm actually here about a complaint filed against this address. You're Linda, correct?" Linda's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed. "A complaint? Against me?" she said, the words dripping with disbelief. "That's preposterous. I'm a model citizen. My property is perfect." She gestured with her watering can as if to prove her point. "Yes, ma'am, I understand," the inspector said, his voice flat. He pointed a thumb to the side of her house. I'm just following up on a report of a potential zoning violation and a case of junk and debris. Linda's face went white. She knew exactly what he was talking about. She had been so sure that no one ever noticed the rusted shed behind her overgrown shrubs. It was a secret, a piece of her past that she kept hidden, a single flaw in her otherwise impeccable facade. She took a few steps, her perfectly coiffed hair now seeming to stand on end. That's not a violation. It's a garden shed. It's temporary. The inspector took a photo of the side of her house. The report states it's an unregistered vehicle, a trailer. It's a clear violation of Municipal Code 5D9 regarding the storage of derelict vehicles and junk. And the report also mentions a constant discharge of water from an unpermitted source. He pointed to the condensation drip, a damning trickle of water. Linda looked from the inspector to the trickle of water. She felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She was the one who called in the complaints. She was the one who enforced the rules. Alex was the transgressor, the one who was supposed to be fined. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the air. "Officer, let me explain. My husband is a city councilman. I'm sure we can clear this up." Alex and Sarah looked out their window and saw Frank, Linda's husband, hurrying out of the house, his tie slightly askew. He was a small, fussy-looking man who rarely spoke. Linda looked at him, her face a mask of furious betrayal. He wasn't a city councilman. He worked in the tax department. It was a lie she had told for years, a piece of social capital she had used to intimidate her neighbors. The inspector didn't seem impressed. "Sir, with all due respect, your position has no bearing on city code. I'm just here to do my job." He pulled out a large, official-looking document from his briefcase. "I have a warrant to inspect your property, and I will be doing so immediately." Linda's jaw dropped. A warrant? For an environmental violation? She had never heard of such a thing. She looked at Frank, who was now nervously wringing his hands. She looked at her perfect house, her perfect lawn, her perfect life, and saw it all crumbling around her. Alex felt a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had built a kingdom on a foundation of lies and petty regulations, and now it was all coming down. He watched as the inspector began to walk around her property, taking photos, marking things on his clipboard. He saw him kneel beside the rusted shed and his heart leaped. He had done it. He had played her game, and he was winning. As the inspector walked away, a final, chilling piece of information from the report came to light. The city will be dispatching a team to perform soil and water quality tests on the affected area, the inspector said. We have reason to believe the shed may have been leaking toxic materials into the ground for an extended period of time. Linda's face went from pale to ashen. Leaking toxic materials? She had forgotten all about the old cans of paint and motor oil she had stored in there years ago, the ones that had been left there by the previous owners. She had never cleaned it out. She had just left it there, a silent, rusting secret. She looked at Alex's lawn, which was now a clean, empty patch of dirt, and she looked at her own, where an insidious, invisible poison might be seeping into the ground. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Linda was no longer the accuser. She was the accused. And Alex and Sarah, the victims of her petty vindictive cruelty, were now the purveyors of poetic justice. The inspector's parting words about soil and water quality tests echoed in the silence, a final devastating blow. Linda's face, a mask of disbelief moments before, was now a pale, ashen canvas of pure terror. The meticulously built walls of her perfect life were not just crumbling. They were being bulldozed by the very bureaucracy she had weaponized against her neighbors. She stood frozen, the watering can now a leaden weight in her hand, staring at the spot where the rusted shed had been rotting for years. The petty injustice of Alex's pool seemed utterly insignificant now. She was facing a real problem. A problem with environmental repercussions, one that could be a danger to her family, and one that she had brought on herself. Frank, her husband, was the first to break. His face was a contorted mix of shame and panic. "Linda, what have you done? That thing has been there for years. We never should have kept it." His voice was a panicked whisper, a stark contrast to his wife's usual theatrical pronouncements. He looked at Alex and Sarah's house, then back at his wife, a silent accusation in his eyes. He had been a silent partner in her petty cruelty, and now the consequences were crushing him. The neighborhood, which had been a quiet, suburban landscape, was now alive with whispers. The news of the inspector and the potential for toxic contamination spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had always deferred to Linda's authority now watched with a mix of morbid curiosity and quiet satisfaction. The perfect facade was gone, replaced by a glaring public flaw. The social capital she had spent a decade building was evaporating in a single afternoon. The lie about Frank being a city councilman, once a source of her power, was now a pathetic joke. Inside their house, Alex and Sarah watched the drama unfold. The sense of triumph they had felt was now mixed with a heavy, unsettling sobriety. This was no longer just about winning. This was about a woman who had let her vindictiveness get so out of control that she had inadvertently unearthed a genuine and potentially dangerous problem on her own property. The battle had escalated beyond their control, and the fallout was more severe than they could have ever imagined. A few days later, a new crew arrived. This time, it wasn't a single inspector. It was a team in city-issued uniforms with a flatbed truck and an official-looking letter from the Public Works Department. They put up yellow caution tape around the area of the shed and began their work. They didn't speak. They simply dug, their shovels biting into the same earth that Alex's had just a week earlier. They took soil samples. They dug down a few feet, their movements slow and deliberate, and then they left. The yard was now a patchwork of disturbed earth and yellow tape, a garish symbol of her downfall. That evening, Alex was out in his yard, watering the freshly sown grass seed on the patch where the pool had once stood. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. His yard was his again, a simple, quiet patch of green grass. That's when he heard the door slam and the familiar, angry footsteps on the pavement. Linda marched across the lawn, her face devoid of its usual prim composure. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair a mess, and her clothes were stained with what looked like dirt. She stopped a few feet from him, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and defeat. "Are you happy now?" she spat, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "Is this what you wanted? You had to go and do this? You had to report me? I could have lost everything. We might have to pay for an entire hazmat team to clean up our yard." Alex turned off the hose, the silence suddenly deafening. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. The mask of perfect civility was gone. He saw a woman terrified, her perfectly constructed world collapsing around her. But he felt no pity. He felt only a cold, hard clarity. "I didn't want any of this, Linda," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I just wanted to take down my pool. You're the one who called the cops on me for it. You're the one who escalated this. You're the one who had an unregistered vehicle leaking toxic materials on your property for years, and you hid it. The city did its job. I just gave them the information. This isn't about me. This is about you, and what you hid from everyone." She recoiled as if he had slapped her. The truth of his words hung in the air, a final, unassailable indictment. She had no clever retort, no cutting remark. She just stood there, her hands clenched, her perfect world in ruins. She had tried to enforce a rule on him, and in doing so, had exposed her own, far more serious transgression. The irony was so profound it was almost comical. She looked around at the now empty lot where the pool had once stood, and for the first time she saw it not as an eyesore, but as a space of peace and simplicity. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her shoulders hunched in a posture of complete defeat. Alex stood there for a long time, the empty expanse of his yard a canvas for a new beginning. He looked at the patch of green he was cultivating, and he felt a deep,